My name is Alicia Pritchard. I am 34 years old. Right after I was born, my mother looked at the doctor and said, "Are you sure this one is mine? She doesn't look like she belongs in this family." She said it loud enough for the nurses to hear. That was the first time she made sure everyone knew I was the mistake they had to keep. Last April, at her 65th birthday, 41 relatives raised their glasses to celebrate the perfect mother and wife they thought she was. Then my cousin Kaz Bryn stood up, raised her glass, and said, "Auntie, there's something I've waited 35 years to tell you." My mother went deathly white. I sat frozen in my chair. At that exact moment, a woman no one had ever seen before walked through the door, placed a wooden box on the table beside the birthday cake, and spoke words that would destroy everything my mother had built. What no one in that room knew was that by the end of the night, the woman everyone had spent 35 years erasing would be the one they could never look away from again. Welcome to Revenger Episodes. If you have ever been the person your family lied to, the daughter they kept rewriting, the child whose own birth was a story they told to make other people laugh, this one is for you. Stay with me to the end. And down in the comments, tell me the sentence your family turned into a joke at your expense. I read every single one. The driveway in Greenwich was full of black sedans by the time I arrived. I was 12 minutes late, which was not by accident. I had pulled into a gas station on the Merritt Parkway, turned the engine off, and listened to my own breathing for 9 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive the rest of the way. I am a senior copywriter at a publishing house in Chicago. My job every day is to ask whether sentences are doing what their writer thinks they are doing. I had been doing the same thing to my own family for 6 years in a therapist's office, and I had never been able to answer the question. My mother opened the front door. She had spent the morning at the salon. She wore a cream silk blouse, the Vance pearls in 3 loops, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Darling," she said. She pulled me into a hug with one arm. Her other hand held a flute of something pale and bubbling. She kissed the air beside my left ear and over my shoulder. She scanned the driveway to see who else was arriving. I had stopped feeling that hug as a hug a long time ago. "You look tired," she said. "Have you been sleeping?" "I drove in this morning," I said. "Of course you did. Go sit. Bryn is here already." The house had been staged the way a house is staged for sale. White peonies in 3 matching glass urns. The blue ceramic cake plate from her grandmother's grandmother sat at the head of the table with a chip on its rim that she always turned inward. A string trio played in the corner. My father stood near the bar cart in a navy blazer, his hands wrapped around a glass of soda water. He did not drink in front of guests. He never had. I counted 41 people in the rooms downstairs. I have always counted because I have always wanted to know whether I was being included in the number or whether I was a guest. That afternoon, I was the 42nd person in the house. My mother had not put me on the seating chart at the head of the table. My place card was at the far end. The card was hand-lettered in my mother's writing. It was 30% smaller than the other cards. I had measured a card from a previous gathering once with a ruler in my apartment in Chicago. Bryn was standing by the sunroom window. She was 35, an art conservator in Philadelphia, taller than me by an inch. With my mother's straight nose, and a laugh that did not come from anyone else in our family. She held a small leather portfolio against her side. Not a purse, not a gift, a portfolio. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked like a person who had been waiting all morning. You came, she said. You said you'd tell me something tonight. She studied my face longer than was comfortable. Then she put her free hand on my shoulder very lightly and she said, "Stay for the cake, okay? Whatever else happens, stay for the cake." She walked away. I watched her cross the room toward my Aunt Cordelia, my father's younger sister, who was setting out canopes on a silver tray. Cordelia put her hand on the small of Bryn's back, the way she had been putting her hand on the small of Bryn's back at every family event since I could remember. And from across the room, without turning her head, my mother said, "Cordelia, the canopus." Cordelia took her hand off Bryn's back. Bryn did not look surprised. Neither did Cordelia. I sat at my place card and opened the grey notebook I had carried for the last 6 years. On the first page was a sentence Dr. Hartwell had said to me in the 3rd month of therapy. Sometimes the body remembers things the mind was never told. On the second page was a sentence my father had said when I was 7, the night my grandmother Pritchard died. "You are mine because I chose you, sweetheart. That is the strongest reason there is." I had always thought it was tenderness. I had written it down because I did not know what else to do with it. I opened to a fresh page. I wrote one line. Mom said, "Darling," to me as if I were a hostess. I closed the notebook. The room was full of people who looked like the photographs in the hallway my mother had been curating since 1980. 41 of them. I was the 42nd. And Bryn, on the other side of the room, kept looking toward the front door, as if she were waiting for someone the rest of us had not been told about. The seating arrangement in our house was not officially announced. It was simply the way my mother set the room. And it was the way she had been setting it since I was small enough that the chair at the far end was too tall for me to climb into without help. My mother used to tell guests with a soft laugh that I had always preferred to. "Alicia is our quiet one. You always did watch more than you spoke, didn't you?" Sweetheart, the story had been told so many times that I had begun by the age of 9 to believe it was true. There is no framed photograph of me in this house younger than 13 months. There are no photographs of my mother holding me before the age of 14 months. When I asked her once when I was 17 and writing a college application essay that required a baby picture, she said, "Babies all look the same, darling. Why would I take dozens?" I started seeing Dr. Hartwell when I was 28, after I cried in a grocery store in the dairy aisle for 19 minutes and could not stop. He asked me what I thought I was crying about. I said I did not know. He asked me what my family was like. I said they were fine. He asked me whether nothing happening might itself be the thing that had happened. That was the first useful sentence anyone had ever said to me. By that afternoon in April, 6 years later, the notebook in my bag was on its 3rd volume. I did not know what I was building. I only knew that I was building. At 3:30, my mother came over to where I was sitting, and she said, "Sweetheart, you're so good at the conversational corner." She did not wait for me to respond. She turned to my Aunt Constance, who was talking to a Vance cousin about a vacation house in Maine, and she corrected the year my aunt had given. That was the summer of 1989, Henrietta, not the spring. She walked away with a half smile. My aunt blinked, laughed, and said, Vivian remembers everyone's life better than they do. My mother did not deny it. I wrote down the correction. I wrote down the laugh. I wrote down the date. My father caught my eye from across the room. He held the gaze for a second longer than was comfortable. Then he looked away. I did not know it yet, but he had been preparing for that afternoon for 35 years. Bryn is the daughter of my aunt Cordelia and my uncle Bernard. Or that is what I had been told for 35 years. The official story was that Cordelia and Bernard had wanted children very badly. That Cordelia had lost a baby boy to sudden infant death syndrome in March of 1991, and that 3 months later they had been blessed with a 4-month-old girl through a private adoption arranged by someone Bernard knew in Vermont. The agency was vague. The paperwork was always described as complicated. The family had agreed at some unspoken meeting. I was never invited to that. No one asked Cordelia about it directly. Bryn and I had grown up close. She had always been held differently from the rest of us. Cordelia hugged her longer. Bernard set his hand on the back of her neck, the way a father sets a hand on the back of a son's neck before letting him walk out into the world alone. Lawrence Whitfield, my father's best friend from law school, who had been at every family event of our childhood, always greeted Bryn by name and then immediately looked at the floor. That afternoon, Bryn was wearing a sweater dress with deep pockets, and in one of those pockets, she had a sealed cream-colored envelope. I saw the corner of it when she crossed the room to refill her glass. The postmark said Doothemen and a date in September. I did not know anyone in Dooth, Minnesota. In Aunt Cordelia's house in Vermont, on a high shelf in the small study of the kitchen, there is a row of identical notebooks with hard navy spines, 35 of them, lined up by year. The label on each spine in Cordelia's slanted handwriting says Bryn year. That afternoon I excused myself to wash my hands, and I went up the back staircase. Cordelia had been staying with my parents for 3 days to help my mother prepare, and her overnight bag was open on the bed in the guest room. The first notebook on top of the pile was 9991. I opened it. March 11th, we buried him. Bernard would not come out of the garage. June 14th, M brought her at dawn. She would not look at her own face when she said goodbye. June 15th, Bernard built the crib in 3 hours. He has not stopped looking at her. I closed the notebook. M. The note did not say the agency. It said M. There was only one M in our family. There had only ever been one. I went back downstairs the way a person goes back downstairs after she has read something she is not allowed to have read. My face did not change. In the sunroom, Bryn had taken a small white pill out of her pocket and swallowed it with a sip of water. I caught the label as I walked past. Prolastin C alpha 1 protein inhibitor, Mayo Clinic, Rochester. No one in our family had ever been a patient at Mayo Clinic. Until that afternoon, no one in our family had ever needed to be. Bryn caught my eye. She did not put the bottle away. It's manageable, she said quietly. I'll tell you tonight. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and watched my mother across the room. She was laughing at something Lawrence Whitfield had said. She had not laughed at anything I had ever said with that volume in my entire life. If you have ever been the cousin who was held differently, or the daughter who was held with one arm or the child who learned to count people in rooms because you could not count on being counted? Say something in the comments. One word, one name, one memory. By the time the cake was carried in, I had spent 20 more minutes watching my mother edit other people's lives in real time. She did it lightly. That was the gift. She did not correct loudly. She simply touched a sleeve, leaned in, and said, "I think you mean the second house, sweetheart, not the first." The guests laughed. The corrected version of their own memory became the version they would carry home. She was carrying a small leather notebook in the pocket of her cream blouse. I had seen her open it twice that afternoon. She had been doing it for as long as I could remember. I had once thought it was a hostess's trick. I understood that afternoon that it was the manuscript of a family she had been writing for 40 years. And every other person in the room was a draft she had not yet finalized. The phrase she used most was, "The Pritchards do not air their laundry." She used it with a young Pritchard cousin who had brought up something about a court case from the early 1980s. We folded it and we put it away. My father, who was standing near the windows, set his glass down on the bar cart with a small click, and he left the room. He stood in the hallway for almost 2 minutes before he came back. Then she did the thing she did every year. She told the story of the day I was born. She told it the way a hostess tells a story she has perfected over 34 tellings. She tucked a strand of silver blonde hair behind her ear. She let her voice get warm and self-deprecating in the rehearsed way of a woman who knows she is about to deliver a punchline. And I, exhausted, sweating, no makeup, hadn't slept in 22 hours. I looked at the doctor and I said, and here she paused for the laugh that always came, "Are you sure this one is mine? She really doesn't look like she belongs in this family." The room laughed. The Vance cousins laughed loudest. Lawrence Whitfield laughed with his mouth closed. My Aunt Constance laughed because she had heard it 34 times. And you laugh on the 35th telling out of muscle memory. My mother turned toward me and said, "Alicia, sweetheart, you've been hearing this story since you were 5? Sit up. This is your part." I sat up. I did not laugh. In my notebook, under the line about darling, I wrote one new line. 34th time, my father was not in the room. He had gone into the hallway again. He did not come back until the laughter was over. He had heard the story 34 times also, and he had never been able to make himself laugh once. I walked through the dining room. The blue ceramic cake plate was set in the center of the table. The chip on the rim, which my mother always turned inward, was turned outward that afternoon. It was facing the chair where Bryn would sit. I do not know whether she had let her hands shake while setting the table. I only knew that the chip was facing Bryn in the kitchen. I overheard one sentence I was not meant to overhear. My mother was at the sink with Cordelia. Her voice was low. Her voice was not warm. Whatever she has to say, she will say it after the cake. "Do you understand me, Cordelia?" 3 full seconds of silence. Cordelia was holding a copper pitcher the way a person holds something to keep from doing anything else with her hands. Then Cordelia said very quietly, "I am not the one you should be afraid of today, Vivian." I stepped back. My mother said nothing in reply. In the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room, Cordelia had left her purse on the bench, and a small accordion ledger had slid halfway out. One line on the open page was circled in pencil. "L wired again. June, same amount." Bernard asked again, said, "For the girl." Bernard didn't ask twice. I knew exactly one L who would have been wiring money to Cordelia in June. He had taught me to throw a softball at the age of 6 in this very backyard while my father watched from the deck. I took a photograph of the line with my phone. I closed the ledger. I sat back down at the far end of the dining table where my mother had placed me, and I waited for 4, the way a person waits for a verdict. At 3 minutes before 4, my mother stood at the head of the table and tapped a silver knife against the rim of her wine glass. The string trio fell silent. 41 people turned toward her. My father stood beside her. He put his hand on the small of her back. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "This family is the most important thing in my life. We are all of us who we are because we are Pritchards." 41 glasses lifted. She did not say my name. She did not say Bryn's. She did not say Cordelia's. She thanked by full name Lawrence and his wife Adelaide, who had not been able to attend that afternoon because, as Lawrence had explained, she had come down with something the night before and was resting in Hartford. The room understood that to mean she had decided to spend the weekend in their second home rather than smile through it. My father stood beside her with his hand on her back, and 3 seconds before the toast ended, his hand fell away. He let it drop very slowly, and he did not put it back. I was the only person facing him from the angle that allowed me to see it. The glasses began to clink. That was when Bryn stood up. She stood up the way a person stands up at a podium she has prepared for. Her glass was in her right hand. Her left hand was in her pocket. She turned to face my mother. She did not look at Cordelia. She did not look at Lawrence. She looked at my mother. The room quieted. 41 heads turned. My mother's smile did not move. Her hand, the one holding the wine glass, began to tremble. I could see it from where I was sitting because I had spent 34 years watching her hands. Auntie Bryn said before we cut the cake, "There is something I have waited 35 years to tell you." 41 people held their glasses in the air. My mother dropped hers. The glass fell from her hand and bounced once on the dining table and rolled in a slow diagonal across the polished walnut. It did not break. It rolled past the blue ceramic cake plate. It rolled past my place card. It came to a stop against the base of a wine glass 2 seats down from where my uncle Bernard was sitting. 3 drops of wine had landed on the runner and made a stain the size of a dime. 41 pairs of eyes followed the glass. Lawrence Whitfield, sitting in the third chair on the right, was the only person in the room who did not look down. He stared instead at the front door. That was when the front door opened. She was a woman in her early 50s, silver hair cut close to the jaw. A navy dress that had clearly been hemmed by someone who did not buy new clothes often. A canvas tote bag printed with the words Darth Public Library. Read more, worry less. She carried in front of her with both hands a small wooden box, walnut about the size of a hardback book. On the lid, in neat block letters burned into the wood, were 3 characters. Al 1991. She walked into the dining room without apology. She walked past Lawrence, who turned in his chair to follow her with his eyes. She walked past my mother, who had not moved since the glass had fallen. She set the wooden box down on the dining table, in the empty space immediately, to the right of the blue ceramic cake plate. She put one hand on the lid. She did not open it. She looked first at Bryn. She nodded at her gently. Bryn nodded back. They knew each other. Then she looked at me. Alicia, she said, "Sweetheart, my name is Astrid. Astrid Lundgren. I wrote you every year on the 9th of September. I am so sorry it took me 35 years to find you." I sat with my hand on the grey notebook on my lap, and I understood, in a way I had not understood any sentence before in my life, that I had been waiting for this woman for as long as I had been alive. She looked then at my mother before she speaks. Astrid said, and she lifted her hand a few inches off the wooden box. "You all need to hear the part. She does not know either." Bryn opened the leather portfolio. Her hands were not shaking. She had practiced this. She laid the contents out on the table between the blue plate and the wooden box. She picked up the first sheet. I got sick in January. I needed a comprehensive genetic panel. The result came back with 2 matches. No one in my life had ever explained to me. She set the sheet down. It was a 23andMe report. Predicted relationship mother-daughter shared DNA 49.9%. The name in the match field was Vivian Vance Pritchard. The room did not gasp. The room did something quieter. The room stopped breathing. Bryn picked up the second sheet, the second match. She set it down beside the first. Predicted relationship father-daughter shared DNA 49.8%. Match Lawrence J. Whitfield. Lawrence stood up. He did not protest. He set his glass of water down